This is the Capitalism and Freedom, the 21st Century podcast, an official podcast of the Hoover Institution Economic Policy Working Group, where we talk about economics, markets, and public policy. I'm Jon Hartley, your host. Today, my guest is Jay Bhattacharya, who is the current director of the National Institutes of Health, the NIH, and previously was professor of medicine, economics, and health research policy at Stanford University until March 2025, when he went emeritus to join the National Institutes of Health. Welcome, Jay. Welcome back.
Thanks, John. I still remember your help in packing up my office in the last days. Uh, those were kind of sad and bittersweet in some ways.
It was very special. Very special, and missing you walking around in your Stanford sweatshirt. So it's
I got to put a tie and jacket on for this job.
Well, great. Well, I know you bought a bunch of new suits and ties, is my understanding from your interview with Peter Robinson. So maybe it's a new look or a new permanent look. But super excited, to talk with you. And you've since moved across the country to Washington, D.C. And I know NIH is based in Bethesda, and you're living in the D.C. area. I'm just curious, how's this transition been? Can you explain just a little bit about what NIH does? I think a lot of people are familiar with how it funds a lot of scientific research, but can you explain to us sort of at a more granular level what NIH is doing, what's going on in the halls of NIH on any given day?
Sure. So first, all these questions all at once, John. So let's start with the first one. I mean, the transition's been shocking. It's a very different job to be a professor than it is to be the director of the NIH. Just personally very dislocating. I'd been a professor at Stanford for 25 years, almost 40 years at Stanford, if you include all the time I'd done my education. So it's been quite the transition. But it's also been the NIH is a incredible organization. It's more than a century old, and if you look at almost every single advance in biomedicine that we take for granted today, well, almost every single medicine that we use, all the sort of knowledge we have in biomedicine, I mean, there's some role the NIH has played in that, and that is just to lead an institution that with that incredible history is really quite humbling. It's faced a lot of challenges in the past few years. And in some ways, it's funny that I am the NIH director because one of the previous directors of the NIH. He sort of didn't like me very much, I guess, at the time. We've since broken bread together.
Francis Collins.
Francis Collins, yeah, and I think I was a big critic of the NIH during the pandemic. But at the same time, I have a great deal of admiration for the work of the NIH. I've been NIH funded my entire career. I was a reviewer for NIH grants for almost 2 decades. I love the NIH, and so the ability to have the ability to lead it and help it address the problems that it sort of created for itself during the pandemic, to restore public trust in it. And to have it actually lead it into the next century of innovation in biomedicine. That's my job.
That's terrific. So I'm just curious. You've laid out a vision for NIH. Tell us, what is your vision for NIH, and tell us, where did the Biden NIH go wrong?
Okay, so I was thinking about how to do this job, as I said, I view my job as a sort of addressing like a crisis in public trust in the NIH. There's a Pew survey that I think 2024 has found that 1 in 4 Americans think that scientists do not do things that are in the interest for the well-being of the people. I mean, just think about that. Like, the NIH relies on essentially broad public support for forever. It's enjoyed pretty bipartisan support. Both Democrats and Republicans have supported it pretty substantially. In fact, I just saw a paper that suggests that Republicans have supported it more than Democrats have in terms of like votes for funding increases and all that over the last 2 decades. And so what you have here is an institution that's broadly loved, and yet the pandemic had ruptured trust. In terms of like creating a vision for it, my view is that I want the reforms, rather than focusing on what went wrong. I want the reforms of the NIH to restore the NIH to its path toward its mission, which is to do research to support research that advances the health and longevity of the American people. Now, if you look at the state of American health, it's not good, John. Right? In a dozen years, we've had no improvement in life expectancy in this country. That is absolutely shocking. I mean, this is something when I was a grad student, I remember reading about the rise in life expectancy in the United States and elsewhere, and just marveled at it. When I was born, I'm an Indian, a naturalized citizen, came to the U.S. when I was 3. I was born in India. I think the average life expectancy of an Indian boy born in 1968 was the year I was born, is something like 48 or 50.
Wow.
And now I'm like 57. And so and what you saw is a steady rise in life expectancy in the developing world and the developed world. And I thought that would go on forever. Now that we're on the other end of a dozen years of no increase in life expectancy in one of the richest countries on earth, the United States, we're in a crisis, right? And in a way, the NIH has not done its job. The job is to support research that advances life expectancy and health. We have chronic disease crises all over the place that are, I just look at the rates of obesity, of type 2 diabetes, of cancer incidence, of psychological maladies, including depression and anxiety at scale. You have huge problems in the health status of our country. We are not a healthy country, John. And so that's the first element of my vision. I want the NIH to focus on research and to do research that reverses those trends. I think the Make America Healthy Again movement is an amazing opportunity for us to refocus the activities of the NIH toward things that actually do advance the health of the public. Now, we've seen in the past dozen years huge advances in knowledge about genetics and a few other items by medicine. But if those don't translate over to better health, then what purpose do they serve? Knowledge for knowledge's sake is not worth funding, and it will not continue to garner support of all the American people if that's all it does. So, item one, we have to make America healthy again, and the NIH is going to play an enormously important part of that. Okay. Got questions more? Because I could go, I have 5 items.
No, keep going. Keep going.
Item two. We have to solve a long-standing problem in biomedicine that's been known. My colleague John Ioannidis at Stanford, who's I think the most highly cited living scientist on earth, right? Just an incredible man. And he in 2005 wrote a paper with a title that goes something like why most published biomedical scientific papers are wrong. Mm-hmm. Absolutely mind-blowing title for a paper. It's 5 pages long. Any young graduate student looking to make a shock should emulate this paper. Although you can't take this because he already thought of it. And it's very convincing. Basically, the assertion is that science is hard, and the standards that we have for publishing in science do not guarantee that the things that are published are true. Worse, we have these publishing standards that guarantees that a large part of what we know to be true, generally null findings, will not get published. And so you have both problems, the false positive and false negatives problem in biomedical publishing, where large chunks of what's published, when independent teams finally ever get around to looking at it, don't find the same thing. I had a professor in medical school told me, Jay, half of what you're learning is just false. John, half of what you're learning is just false. It's true for econ as much as it is, I think, for biomedicine. And the reason why is because economics is hard and medicine is hard. Science is hard. You can, as a scientist, you can convince yourself that you know the truth. You do your analyses and you can, but very often you make hidden assumptions that you didn't realize you were making. There's some there's things you do to that where there's unexamined assumptions that you have made, and it results in you're convincing yourself you're right, and if you're a good writer, you can be very convincing even to peer reviewers. And the statistical standards we use are not strong enough to guarantee that there won't be good, false ideas published with statistical evidence to suggest that they're true. Mm-hmm. So And so what you have is a replication crisis caused by the fact that science is hard. You build on top of that a reward structure in science that says, if I can publish my papers in a top journal, then I am an excellent scientist who says true things about the world. I'll climb the social status ladder, and so that creates incentives to write papers that are I mean, and sometimes fraudulent,
Mm.
right? Because all that matters is you publish a top paper in a top journal. If you can get away with it, you might cut some corners here, cut some corners there.
Or p hack. I mean, I think
Yeah, I mean,
there are the Francesca Gino and Daniel Ariely sort of cases where it's like outright fraud. Somebody actually totally made up their data. But I guess there's the more pernicious thing, which is just running 1,000 regressions and only reporting the one that worked, and then so it's a peak hacking thing, but in reality we know that that there's some just naturally some hypotheses are going to occasionally be a false positive from time to time, and so if we end up just only publishing these sorts of these p hack studies, we end up being in a place where we publish things that sort of just accidentally happen to be true, and we just found those small those small instances, and we hunted them all down, and even though they're not really that robust.
Yeah. Well, so think about that. So now I have to say, when I look at the scope of John's allegation, which is essentially that most of what's published, or much of what's published, is not true, and also the fraud, the potential for fraud, I actually think the first is much more important. I mean, much more pervasive. Most scientists aren't committing fraud. The vast majority are not committing fraud. We're just telling ourselves that we think the world works a certain way, and we can convince ourselves, we publish it, but the world doesn't work that way. Science is just hard. Now,
Mm.
they're linked problems, because you have a system that rewards publication in top journals as a measure of social status and advance in science. You're going to get the fraud, but the harder problem is sifting between true and false when you publish. And the replication crisis is a symptom of that. When I mean, like, there've been now dozens and dozens and dozens of demonstrations of this replication crisis. In field after field after field. Psychology probably was the first big field to have these crises, but now you're seeing these crises in field after field after field. Biomedicine, certainly. And in fact, when drug developers sort of decide whether to invest in research in a certain area, they'll conduct their own private replication efforts to check if the papers they're relying on are true before they make the millions of dollars of investment in subsequent research. Right? In a sense, it's a violation of the basic idea of how science operated once upon a time, which is on trust. If you have a paper that's published, I would trust you that you've reported accurately what you've done. But if I can't rely on that, then it makes the whole advance in science difficult. I mean, there's enormous consequences for having a biomedical literature published that is not reliable. And I want to solve that problem. I want to solve that problem, and I think the NIH has it in its capacity to do so. In my view, there's sort of two related things. One is there's very little return to doing replication work. It's often something you hand off to a graduate student to do to like, as a practice exercise.
Mhm.
You can't get it published anywhere because it's seen as non-original. So that's one problem, right? Almost no returns to actually doing replication and publicizing it. And then the second problem is that you never get any return for doing the kinds of pro-social things as a scientist that allow replication to happen. In fact, it's the other way. If someone approaches me and says, Jay, I want to replicate your paper from 1987 or whatever, actually 1996 or whatever, that'd be my first paper. Well, I'm gonna say, well, why do you hate me, John? What's wrong with me? And rather than what I should be thinking, which is, it's a great honor that you're revisiting my not very seminal work from 1996. Like, it gives it more importance, right?
Mhm.
And in fact, that act of being a pro-social action, like I make my data publicly available, I make my code publicly available, I describe my sort of protocols in a way so that you don't even have to approach me. You can just try to replicate it yourself just based on what I've written. Those are all measurable things that are good for science, even if you don't do replication, right? There are activities of science that allow replication to happen, and yet we don't reward it.
Mm-hmm.
We measure, I mean, I'm sure you've gone to Google Scholar. You can look and see what Google Scholar, they have measures like the number of citations that you have, or the
Mm-hmm.
number of papers that you have, or the H index, God forbid. As an aside, the H index is a terrible measure of scientific productivity. It's like, it's, how it works, right? It's
Yeah.
you got to have an H index of K, means you have at least K papers with K citations each, right?
Mm-hmm.
So imagine Francis and Watson and Crick, Francis Crick and James Watson. They published their one paper in their entire life, which is the double helix structure of DNA. It gets 1 million citations, fundamentally transforms how you think about, everyone thinks about biology. If you just had that one paper in your life, you think you'd have a successful scientific career, right?
Right. But an H index of 1, I guess, in this case.
Yes, because in this hypothetical, they don't have a second paper with at least 2 citations. So but they do have one paper with at least 1 citation, 1 million citations, mind you, but 1. Their H index is 1. And if same thing with they'd have the same H index as someone with 1 million papers, each with 1 citation in the Journal of Irreproducible Results or something. And that, that also would have an H index of 1. It's a terrible measure. But you'll notice what those measures, what they're actually measuring. They're measuring volume, how many papers you have, and influence. Volume and influence. Are those the only real measures of productivity for scientists we want? It's like measuring a baseball player by, stolen bases, but you don't also have caught stealings.
Yeah.
Or home runs, but you also have strikeouts, right? You need to have a more complete measure of set of things that we want. And if you measure it, as economists all know, if we measure it, we'll reward it. We can reward it. You can change cultures around measurement, right? Let's stick with, sorry, John, go ahead.
No, I was just saying, I wonder if this sort of shift, I don't know, maybe there's a reason for it in the sense that, like, there are just fewer low-hanging fruit scientific ideas nowadays. There's this whole sort of idea that productivity is slowing down because we're running out of good ideas, and maybe at some level in academia people are sort of running out of ideas. So it's fewer Nobel Prizes given out for these incredible singular achievements, whether it's double helix DNA or black shoals. There's just like concrete single papers. Right now it's a career, and it's a literature, or changing a literature. It's the Acemoglu Johnson Robinson paper. A lot of people are like, well, the papers aren't really wrong, or really replicable, but it changed the direction of the literature, and that got people using. It was the first paper to use applied tools with understanding whether institutions matter for growth, and economic growth is a big question. And I think Jeroen's brilliant. I think it's a brilliant research team, but it's interesting how maybe this is all part of a trend that people are trying to really promote themselves when there really aren't as many very concrete findings as maybe there were, say, a couple generations ago.
I just don't agree with that, frankly. Actually, it's part of a third part of my vision. I don't believe that that the world is bereft of opportunities for ideas that advance fundamentally our understanding of the way the world works. I mean, if I look at the way our knowledge of the way the world works, the physical world works, I think we're still in our infancy of our understanding of it. Right? There's vast fields of knowledge still to be gained, vast ways of thinking that we just haven't discovered yet. What we have is an incentives problem, not an opportunities problem, in my view. That we haven't given people enough incentives. By the way, that's my third part of my vision, to get to transform biomedicine in a way so that people want to find those ideas, those new ideas. We become stuck in a rut in ways, and some sort of the Peter Thiel stagnation kind of idea. And I want to fix that. Before we move off replication, though, I want to close the loop on replication. If you solve those problems, you reward people who want to do replication, give them a place to publish it, and you measure pro-social activities that encourage replication by scientists, you're gonna have replication essentially become the standard of truth in science. It's an epistemological revolution, rather than saying, is it published in the QJE or the AER, or is it published in New England Journal of Medicine, Biomedicine, or Cell or Nature as the standard of whether some idea is true or false. Instead, what will become the standard of truth is the idea replicated? Are other people, when they look at the same thing, do they find the same thing as you do? And is it important? Obviously, will remain an important part of this. But like, if you have important ideas that are replicated, those ideas then have people will have more confidence that are true. It won't just be that you're published in a top journal. Right now, what we have is authority-based measures of truth.
Mm-hmm.
An epistemological revolution with replication says it should be replication that's the standard of truth. Imagine you search in biomedicine's PubMed. You search PubMed, you get a paper that comes up, and you have a replication button. You click the replication button, and all the relevant replication efforts for the paper pop up alongside it with some AI summary of what it says and with links to each paper's of replication effort, so you can assess yourself.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it won't matter then if it's published in a top journal. Even top journal papers won't necessarily replicate.
Absolutely. Well, I'm totally with you that we need replication, and I've written some papers on how much p hacking there are in certain RCTs that, and to what degree pre-registration, for example, improves or reduces the amount of p hacking. But I'm just curious, like, what are the tools that we can use to properly create these incentives? Like, are we going to have, like, I don't know, more replication journals, or are we going to have, I don't know, more meta science, type studies being rewarded? Or like, I'm just curious in the sense that, I think there's still this problem, which is, we have this like tenure system that generally is rewarding people for these, papers that, it takes time to write a paper, it takes time to replicate a paper, that, at some level, like, it's still there. You have these tyrannies of whatever the metrics are. In economics, it's top five. How many top five publications you have? Maybe you need five or so to get tenure in a top department. Similar with finance, there's top three, clear top three journals. Like, how do you break the tyranny of the top five, or how do you get the top five to actually care about uh, uh, replication, and how do you get people to be incentivized to do replications to the point where that could actually help someone get tenure? I'm curious.
Let me just stick to biomedicine, because that's the job at the NIH. Fixed economics is another question. Probably beyond me, John. Frankly, in biomedicine, the NIH has tremendous power to solve this problem. So first, we can and will start awarding researchers large grants to do independent replication. That'll be their job. We'll find the new Johnny and Edie's of the world, and have them compete for grants and give them grants, large grants. Those are signals to their institutions that these are excellent scientists, and they'll start to gain promotion and tenure. Whereas now they don't get it, just because simply the NIH awarding a large grant is a strong signal of this is an excellent scientist.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Second, the NIH can stand up a replication journal. In fact, we'll do that. We already have the Journal of the National Cancer Institute. It's not something that we're not used to doing. And essentially, we'll have like a repository where you can put your replication work, and we can link it to PubMed, which is another NIH product, where you can do the kind of replication button in the search results and say, does this paper replicate, and get that summary. Those are all just. I think I can just this is something I can just have the NIH do as director.
Mm-hmm.
And in fact, I'm going to have the NIH do as director. We'll have to stand up. We're working on standing up this new replication office that we're inside the office of director, where it'll coordinate those replication activities across all the NIH. And then third,
this is the Office of Research Economics Planning and Analysis, or OREPA. Is that?
Yeah, that's the current acronym for the OREPA for the office. But that would be its activity to sort of coordinate the kind of replication activities with the aim of inducing a culture change within all of, and essentially an epistemological revolution is what it's really aiming at. And then the third thing is that we can start to develop metrics. There's a whole field of science. My colleague and former student Miko Pakalin and I have written a whole bunch of papers together using the method of methods of econometric methods applied to science. The people like Pierre Azoulay, Bruce Weinberg, Donna Ginther, a whole host of like fantastic economists who've devoted their attention to this field. We can develop metrics, those metrics. We can expand the metrics so that right now we are in a kind of okay, you're too young for this, John, but like once upon a time there was a fantastic sabermetrician. Sabermetrics is like the science of baseball research. And there was a guy named Bill James.
Bill James. I know Bill James. I used to work. I spent a year doing football analyst for the Dallas Cowboys. Long story short.
What? Are you serious? Okay, that's fantastic.
He's still going, I think.
He is. He's still. I think he works with Red Sox. I'm not sure. Anyways,
yes, I think that's right, or was for a long time. He might have parted ways in recent years, I think. But yeah.
Well, in the 1980s, I used to get his baseball abstracts. Apparently, he was like a night watchman. He would sit there writing books. Cranky books about how no one understood baseball because they didn't have the right set of statistics. And I would read him going like, man, he's right. So like he had this point, which if anyone who knows baseball realizes very quickly, that a baseball hitter, their main job is to not get out.
Mm-hmm.
And yet the standard baseball statistics back then didn't value walks. Well, if you get a walk, you draw 4 balls and you get to first base or whatever. That means you didn't get out. That's a good baseball player, right? That has the ability to draw walks. So they get these like statistics where he would like re-rank them based on a broader set of productivity metrics, and very different players that end up being the top player. Like Wade Boggs turned out to be a big hero of his and mine because he was a Red Sox fan. I'm a Red Sox fan. So we went from that to the Moneyball. Remember that movie? It was about the Oakland A's who grabbed all of these statistics, transformed how they made personnel decisions, and became a small market team that would get, that would win a lot of games every year as a result of taking advantage of these like new statistical methods. We are right now in science. We are in the Bill James age. There are all these science of science kind of ideas floating around with metrics that are burbling up. But we are not in the Moneyball age. We have to start measuring productivity using the kind of things we actually want scientists to do, right? Pro-social behavior by scientists. Like, do you share, what fraction of your papers have you shared your data? What fraction of your papers have you shared your code? That would be in economics. In biomedicine, it might be tissue samples. It might be like how well do you write your method sections so that people don't have to come and ask you for how did you do it, what your secret sauce was. They can just replicate it directly just based on the description. If you have those metrics, people will start to do it. And then if you have this epistemological revolution where what matters is, are your ideas replicable? Do you have important ideas that actually are replicated? Then what will happen is all the incentives for fraud will drop away. It won't matter how many top 5 papers you have. What will matter is, are the ideas you have, whether they're published in top 5 papers, important, and are they replicated? Right? It just changes the whole incentive structure of science. And I think the NIH can, at least for biomedicine, we can accomplish this.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I guess one thing, for example, I think that would be super interesting to look at, and maybe something that you're doing is, we don't, or the public at least hasn't really, and researchers outside the NIH haven't really had the data that we need, for example, to measure like how effective NIH grants are. And like to do that, I think you need, at least I guess from an econometric sort of approach and a methodological approach, you'd need the applications for the NIH grants, not just the successful ones, but those that have been turned away and or rejected, and so you could probably do some sort of analysis of if there was some ranking. You could sort of look at the marginal ones that were just accepted, the ones that weren't, and
no, we're gonna have that. That's what this new office I'm developing is going to do. We'll have great econometricians in there. We'll make the data. There's some restrictions because you don't want scientists to send their proposals in and fear that the ideas will get stolen. So there'll be some protections, but we'll make to the extent that that's feasible, those data and raw data available. So a broader set of scientists can start to make their own metrics as well. I mean, I want this field to just blossom because it's the key to solving all the crazy instances of scientific fraud. You ask yourself, how come it's happening? Like, why are these like prominent people being found to have committed fraud? It's not fundamentally a moral issue. It's not, and how do I put this? I said that wrong. It's not fundamentally an issue of individual moral failure, repeated individual moral failure. It's a system failure. We have created the wrong incentives in science. If we create a different set of incentives around replication, all the incentives to commit fraud will go away. Because why would you commit fraud if you're not going to get credit for it? Who cares if you're published in top journal? If you committed fraud, then no one's going to be able to replicate your work. You're not going to get credit for it.
Exactly. All about getting back to truth. I mean, it's
an epistemological revolution.
That has to be if truth isn't centric, there has to be truth before justice or other concept, for whatever reason why people get into doing research, and maybe people want to help or maybe there's a lot of researchers that maybe have some sort of activist intentions, to shape policy or to shape, I don't know, their field or some sort of policy or some set of, I don't know, commercializing some sort of set of drugs or whatever have you, whatever those incentives are. Truth has to come before.
That's the
before
thing.
that.
Like once you establish that some idea has some likelihood of being true, then you can start to discuss: is it important for public policy? Is it important for development of drugs? Is it important for changing how patients should behave, or what advice we give, whatever, right? That truth is a necessary condition for the effectiveness of science.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why that's the second part of my vision. I want to solve this replication crisis. It's because it's fundamental. If we think of science as a hugely productive thing, but it's only productive to the extent that it actually encourages people to have incentives to find true things about the way the physical world works.
Absolutely.
Okay. Let's go to my third point. We spent a long time on this one. But this was important, right? So
replication crisis is a big one.
Okay. So you've already set up the third one, which is the stagnation problem, right? So a few years back, Chad Jones and some of his colleagues, a fantastic economist at Stanford, of course, wrote a paper where he calculated the number of papers in cancer, in breast cancer, about breast cancer per advance in survival for breast cancer patients, right? And what you find is, like, if you go back to the 50s, 60s, the number of papers written per improvement in survival of breast cancer patients was actually pretty low. And then there's like this flattening of the curve where now every single sort of month of life expectancy increase for breast cancer patients involves literally thousands and thousands of papers. The per dollar we spend on biomedicine, we're getting less advanced than we used to get. Right. And you laid it out well, actually. You said, well, what if there aren't enough? What if we've run through all the easy ideas and we're just now on the flat of the curve into perpetuity? We're never going to make any new advances because everything is just really, really hard to make any advances. I was reading the other day, a physicist, a very famous physicist, an empirical physicist from the turn of the 19th century, who said exactly that about physics. He'd seen an enormous generation of tremendous advance in physics where electromagnetism had been sort of worked out. Of course, there was Isaac Newton, and mechanics had been worked out. Huge advances in physics. And he said, well, what if we're done with physics and all the rest is just footnotes? The finding the 500th decimal in Planck's constant or something, right? And of course, just a few years after that, there were enormous revolutions in physics. The relativity and the quantum theory, and like just huge advances. You don't know that you don't know that those advances around the bend unless you keep knocking at the door. You
Mhm.
keep trying new ideas out. And let's just bring it back to economics. You create a incentive structure where those new ideas are allowed to be tried out.
Mhm. I think to complete your analogy, it's I think when I believe George Bernard Shaw and Einstein won the Nobel Prize in the same year, or were at the same Nobel Prize gala, and I believe George Bernard Shaw, was congratulating Einstein and overturning Newton, and he said, he looked forward to the day when someone overturns what Einstein's thought of the day was. So I mean, I guess it's knocking at that door.
Yeah. Again,
Bernard Shaw's
let's leave aside
job.
physics because I don't know anything about physics, but let's just stay with this. Um, Stay with biomedicine. I did some work with Miko Pakalin a few years back where we looked at how old are the ideas in the published biomedical literature? How old are the newest ideas supported by the NIH? Okay, so first of all, how do you measure how old ideas are? It's actually weirdly simple. So you take PubMed, you take all of the papers in PubMed, which is all of them in biomedicine, that were published in 1940. You then do the same thing in 1941, get rid of all the synonyms, and then subtract off all the 1940 ideas. And what you're left with are the new ideas that were introduced into medicine in 1941. Just comes straight out of some complicated, large scale computer analysis, easy as pie. And then you do it in 42, 43, 44, 45. What you have is a history of biomedicine. Every year you see all the new ideas that were introduced in that year. You go back to the papers and ask, how old are the newest ideas in each paper? How old are the newest ideas in each paper, right? So a paper that's on the cutting edge will be working on ideas that are 0 year old at the time that the paper is published. Papers that are working on older ideas will have 10, 15 years old as the newest idea, right? Now, if you go back and ask, how old were the ideas for papers that were supported by the NIH in the 1980s? Well, those papers were working on ideas that were 0, 1, 2 years old, like really at the bleeding edge. If you look at the 2010s, what you see is papers that are working on ideas that are 7, 8 years old. We become way too small c conservative in biomedicine, way too afraid to try new ideas out. In a sense, we punish failure too much. It's very different than Silicon Valley, right? So in Silicon Valley, you have your portfolio manager, you have 50 projects. You've done all your you got your Stanford MBA, so you just need to diversify the portfolio. And the key thing is, it doesn't matter if the 49 of those projects fail. If the 50th is like Google or something, that's a very successful portfolio.
Mm-hmm.
In biomedicine, and in at the NIH in particular, it's become much more conservative in the sense of, if an institute director at the NIH funds a portfolio of 50 projects and 49 of them fail, and the 50th solves type 2 diabetes or something, often you're going to get people who are going to complain that why do they fund 49 projects that fail? That's a problem. So the result of that kind of reward structure, and I remember being told this very early on in my research careers, Jay, be sure to hit the bunt singles. You can swing for the fences every once in a while, but you got to hit the bunt singles. Get a lot of papers out. The problem is that we need people to be willing to try new ideas out, to invest in them, to take risks on them. Silicon Valley doesn't punish people who fail all that much, right? If they fail productively, they'll get another chance.
We have limited liability and all these sorts of things that give you this,
Yeah,
I
but
guess, real
in
option value. That
biomedicine, it's the other way, John. We if you your postdoc, if you don't get a paper in Cell, you're done. You're not going to get that next postdoc, right?
Mhm.
We punish failure too much in biomedicine, and we essentially don't allow early career researchers who are the font of new ideas enough ability to try their new ideas out when they're still young. That's new, by the way, in biomedicine. In the 1980s, we funded researchers with large grants. Their first large grant would be in their mid 30s, and now it's in their mid 40s. we
Yeah.
basically make it too difficult to establish yourself as a career in biomedicine nowadays than before, and I think that's the root of the stagnation problem that you saw that Chad Jones sort of documented so well. Chad Jones and his colleague documented so well. I think who else? There's another Stanford economist who's on the paper, but anyways, but the point is that that stagnation problem, that stagnation problem is again an incentive problem. And we have to change the incentives in how we fund research to allow that kind of innovation to actually happen.
So it's more like, how do you make NIH kind of like a venture capital or VC accelerator in a sense?
Yeah, exactly, exactly. And so, okay, so this is something I just recently been working on, and I think this is this. I don't know if this is the only innovation we need to do this, but I think it's part of it. We have these at the NIH, the way it's structured. There are 27 institutes and centers and offices, each of which are like focus, many of which are focused on disease areas or whatnot. They're the head of it is an institute director who's a world-class scientist, and they're responsible for the portfolio of investments in their area that the NIH makes. Uh, the emphasis has in many of those institutes is to we have a great peer review system where you send in a proposal, we'll get it scored, and what they'll do is they'll look at the top nth percentile of 10% of scored grants and then fund those grants, because we have a great this peer review system that's with again with world-class scientists doing the peer review, evaluating each grant. The problem is, and I've been a peer reviewer, I can tell you the emphasis is on methods. It's so easy to say to a new idea, well, no one's tried that, it can't work. Really, really easy to do that. Kill a new idea. They're supposed to score innovation, and they do, but they don't really emphasize innovation in deciding what gets the best scores. And also, the peer review will tend to focus on areas that are currently hot rather than things that are promising but not yet hot. Right. The institutes have their own strategic plans that they put up every few years of like where the most promising ideas there are in their fields. So what I've done is a change in how the institutes are going to choose their grants. They'll still have peer review. You'll still have the scientific scores and peer review, absolutely the fundamental bedrock of how the proposal is going to be evaluated. But suppose there's 10 grants that are basically looking at the same idea and that are part of the strategic plan, and basically one or two grants that didn't score quite as well because the peer reviewers didn't really know about the idea, because a new idea. The institute directors will have the capacity to pick their portfolio to match the strategic plan. Maybe they'll take one or two grants from the 10 that's in the hot area, and one or two grants from the less hot area but like very promising area. And they're going to be evaluated not based on every single individual grant working, but rather the portfolio as a whole. Does it actually advance knowledge in ways that improve health of the population? Right? Does it make America healthy again? Does it change biomedicine? Does it produce fundamental changes in basic science that advance biomedical knowledge? Things like that for the portfolio as a whole, rather than sort of grant by grant. We got to punish failure less. We also have to think of ways to like advance the careers of early care researchers much more. And that's stuff also I think we can do much better than we have.
Absolutely. Well, it's funny, I think you and Peter Thiel were in the same class, or maybe a year apart from each other at Stanford. So I think given how much time you spent at Stanford, both in, I think, all your schooling and many years as a professor, I think you probably understand the VC mentality probably better than anyone else. So
Peter and I were friends. I think I met him when I was 19. He was he founded the Stanford Review. He was my dorm. He was poor then, so at one point I think I lent him pizza money. I think he still owes me. Peter, if you're listening, you don't have to pay me back. I forgive the debt. He
got to think about how much interest there could be there, or what the return is on that.
No, we were friends. We are friends now still. But yeah, I mean, he I think has been probably the most prominent person articulating this idea about stagnation, scientific stagnation, and decrying it, calling for changes in how we think about science so that we can get more real advances. And I think he's right. But I don't think the problem is any lack of opportunities in science. I think the ideas are there. We just need to set the incentives for people to find them.
That's it's fascinating. I mean, it's amazing, for many years, until I think just recently, maybe the past couple of years since sort of the dawn of all these generative AI tools going online, that there was kind of a refrain for like 10 years during the 2010s and that period. We had these books like by Robert Gordon in economics, the rise and fall of economic growth, and or the rise and fall of American economic growth, I think is the title. And this idea, that we're running out of ideas, and that's why we're becoming less productive. And we had these great ideas in the early 20th century, whether it was commercial air travel, air conditioning, which allows people to work in much warmer climates, huge for the developing world, and the southern United States. You had all these, you had all these household appliances. Much later, or I mean, you had the automobile in the early 20th century, and the internet at the close of the 20th century, and all these things. It's kind of like, I guess, what a lot of people look back on and say, in the first maybe couple decades of the 20th, the 21st century is, compared to all those incredible innovations, all we got were, social media apps, and I mean, those might be, some sort of a negative productivity innovation, perhaps. But where are all these incredible, innovations that are going to increase productivity? And it's interesting now. We obviously had, the mobile phones and smartphones and so forth, but which allows us to do certain things. But I think the release of generative AI tools, I think the conversation around that has changed at least, and it's more sort of, I guess, people are open to this idea that generative AI tools in sort of their successors or innovative successors could potentially be hugely transformative. I'm curious if you have any thoughts on, I guess, generative AI and how it intersects with NIH, what NIH is funding and thinking about.
I mean, I think AI tools are probably a counterexample to the assertion you're making about the assertion, the hypothesis you're putting forward about the slowdown in ideas. I mean, that's just an unexpected leap in
Hmm.
the ability of machines to look like they're reasoning. Although I don't think they're actually reasoning, but they are really a big step forward. And I think that in health, it's going to transform the way we do drug discovery. It already has, like, AlphaFold and its ability to predict protein structures has just sort of pushed drug development leaps and bounds forward. It's going to change the way that I mean, just something as mundane as like you go to a doctor and the doctor is staring at the screen the whole time rather than looking at you, because they're writing in all the billing codes that need to bill. Uh, Imagine AI sitting there listening and then filling in all the records for the billing, and then of course the doctor can look and just very quickly do that afterwards. Instead, they spend their time looking at you, right? Imagine a tool that helps the doctor make sure that they've thought through every single diagnosis, that gives suggestions to radiologists or cardiologists, where they compare against other patients that are similar to you. You're still going to need doctors. You still need the human touch. When people are sick, they really do need human beings to like be there caring for them, especially smart human beings that are like thinking about what their problems are in concrete ways. But AI has the possibility of transforming so much in biomedicine, and we are absolutely at the NIH investing in that. If maybe I'm wrong. If maybe they won't be as productive as I think it will be. But in my view, it's already proved to be quite productive, and it will be. I think if we invest more, we'll think of better ways to make sure that to make that productivity happen, but also to make sure that it doesn't hallucinate and hurt patients and things like that.
Hmm. That's fascinating. Okay, I think that was number four. Is that right?
That was three, actually.
Three. Okay.
That's still under three. The stagnation. Let me do four. I'm almost done. I promise, John.
Okay.
Four is we have to make sure that we don't harm people or take existential risks on behalf of the human populations in the research we do. Okay, let me motivate this. This is going to be controversial to some people, not controversial to others. It is quite possible that COVID was caused by scientific research that we supported, that the Chinese conducted, but we were part of. There was a big debate in the 2000 teens over a research paradigm called gain of function research, dangerous gain of function research. Let me tell you the research paradigm. The idea was that we could prevent all pandemics. It's a very utopian idea. What you do is, here's what you do. You fund research to go out into the wild places, find the viruses, find the pathogens, bring them back to city centers, manipulate them so that they're more transmissible among humans, only in the petri dish. The reason you do that is that if you can distinguish between pathogens you bring back from the wild that are very easily manipulable so that they become only a few evolutionary steps to make the leap into human populations versus other pathogens that are very evolutionarily far away from being able to make that leap, well, then you can focus on the pathogens that are likely to make the leap, that are close in evolutionary space, prepare vaccines in advance, prepare all this other stuff in advance, so that when it makes the leap, you're ready. That's the paradigm. The first time someone actually accomplished this, of taking, it was avian flu in 2010-11, making it more transmissible. This is NIH funded research. The scientific community said, this is ridiculous. This is too dangerous. You have the chance, if there's a lab leak, of causing a massive pandemic that will kill millions of people. We shouldn't be doing this kind of research, right? Let's go back to physics. Enrico Fermi, when he launched the nuclear age, what he did is he did a calculation, the first nuclear chain reaction on the squash court at the University of Chicago, of all places. He did a calculation of, will this chain reaction consume the earth, burn the earth, or can we make it stop if we want to? And the calculation before he did this experiment was that the probability of consuming the earth was 0. And so then he did the experiment that would launch the nuclear age. We need to do that with biomedicine. And President Trump's executive order on danger, gain, and function actually allows us to have that kind of risk-based paradigm for thinking about regulating biomedicine. Like the majority of biomedical research has no risk of causing this kind of pandemic, right? So, but we need a regulatory structure that gives incentive to scientists and institutions to subject any experiment that does have the potential for catastrophic risk to be subject to this regulation, where other independent eyes can decide, should we do this work? A scientist alone or an institution alone should not be independently able to make decisions that risk vast harm to literally billions of people simply for scientific curiosity or other reasons. And so that the gain of function executive order by President Trump essentially allows us to have a regulatory framework that will reduce that risk to near 0. And the White House is still working on that. We're helping. This is something I think is tremendously important. It's important to me because the way you restore trust is by telling people we're working on your behalf. We're not trying to do crazy things that will risk your family's health and well-being. Quite the opposite. And so to me, this kind of sort of attention to biosecurity, attention to like the sort of the riskiness of biomedical research is very, very important. It's a necessary condition for restoring trust.
Are there any efforts to ensure that that's happening, say, in China? Obviously, they may not be as careful as the U.S. with these sorts of things. I mean, obviously, there's only so much you can do from like a diplomatic standpoint, and China that's has broken many agreements, and they don't respect U.S. intellectual property. I mean, there's all sorts of issues. But I guess is that obviously human rights is kind of, I think, has been front and center with a lot of these conversations with China, along with sort of defense issues, Taiwan, and so forth. But have these sorts of conversations come up in any of those sorts of discussions? I also know, like AI, often one of the criticisms that I hear about sort of unregulated AI is that while there's some possibility that someone could use a chatbot tool in, say, a random foreign country to help build some sort of a bioweapon that they could use against the United States or peaceful people. Do either of those things concern you, or
they do
attempts
actually
to fight these things?
Absolutely concern me. I mean, I think President Trump has set a huge example for the whole world by taking this kind of dangerous gain of function seriously and regulating it so that we essentially make a commitment not to do it. We're telling the whole world, you shouldn't be doing it either. You shouldn't be taking risks that risk the harm to every human being on the planet just for scientific curiosity or whatever gains you think you're going to get from it. Even if it's, let's say it's you think you're doing bioweapons research with it or whatever, right? That's
Mhm.
banned by the 1973 Bioweapons Convention. But say you're doing really, there's no way to guarantee that you won't harm your own population in the conduct of that research. We kind of
Mhm.
need a strengthened bioweapons convention, something that a gain of functions convention, essentially, dangerous gain of functions convention that's international in scope, that says this is not research that's worth doing. It's not going to help anybody. It's not in any country's interest to do it, because it's research that if you cause catastrophic harm to human populations, you will also harm your own populations in doing it. There's no nationalistic interest in doing it. This is the kind of thing that really should be subject to international treaties.
Mhm.
But I think it's really amazing that President Trump is the one that actually took the step, that said, look,
Mhm.
we're going to unilaterally not do this because it's not in American interest to do it. It's frankly not in anybody's interest to do this kind of dangerous research.
Mhm. Absolutely. No, it's yeah, being 5 years up from COVID, it still looms large in the memories of many, to say the
Mhm.
least. Okay, so number five. Have we got?
Last one, and I promise to let you go, John. You had no idea I'd keep you so long, but
No, no, this
the
is
number five
terrific.
is free speech and academic freedom. And John, you probably know this. Actually, we talked about this in our previous podcast that we did together. Um, COVID was a very difficult time for scientists to express their ideas, especially if they disagreed with sort of the dominant pro lockdown, pro mask mandate, pro vax mandate kind of ideas. And it made scientific progress during the COVID era much harder than it should have been. Science depends on free speech to thrive, right? If you disagree with me, John, you absolutely should be able to say that you disagree with me and you explain why. And I've had many situations. I've taught at Stanford for 25 years. I had so many situations. Some of my proudest moments when a student would tell me I'm wrong, and then they would be right, and we would write a paper together. Hiding the fact that I was wrong before, of course, so from the world. But that kind of open correction of each other is the heart and soul of science. And restrictions on free speech and academic freedom are anathema to scientific progress. They're absolutely necessary step required for progress in science. And the NIH needs to be a catalyst for this kind of free speech throughout the country. Um, at the NIH itself, when I came in, I found out that they had a policy for that. We have a whole bunch of intramural scientists, amazing biologists who do a whole host of different kind of research internally inside the NIH, publish it in scientific literature. I found out there was a policy in many of these institutes where the scientists themselves had to seek permission, substantive permission from their supervisors before they were allowed to send their papers out for review by journals. That's not academic freedom. That you can't make science advance if you have those kinds of restrictions where you're worried about what your supervisors think about your science. Obviously you want good science, but you don't want your supervisors to tell you, well, I don't like this result, you can't send it out. So I put in a policy now where any intramural researcher can just send their paper out for scientific review without asking any permission. I fully expect there'll be papers published at the NIH that I don't agree with, I don't even like. But those researchers that the NIH should absolutely have the opportunity to publish those papers.
Mhm.
I want to lead by example, but I also want to encourage, and this is something I think the Trump administration it's caused a lot of angst in the scientific community and in scientific community, the academic community at large. But I think it ultimately, in the long run, is a good thing. The sort of like pushing universities to adopt policies consonant with this idea of scientific freedom, of academic freedom, as essentially as a way to say, look, if you don't do this, then you're not really a great research partner with us, right? If you
Mhm.
don't have these policies that allow the scientists at your institutions to have their ideas and not suppress them, to allow free speech at universities, really the universities that don't have those kinds of free speech environments are not good environments to do science. You're always looking over your shoulder, wondering if the paper you're writing is going to get you canceled. Well, you're not going to write that paper, right? And you cannot have this political apparatchik overseeing hiring decisions, and now it's caused a lot of angst, I know, among researchers, that, well, look, my field is fine. How come you're blaming me for problems in these other fields? But the university as a whole needs to have a culture that advances science, that has free speech at its core. Because if you don't, then you can't actually trust that the scientific work out of those universities is really true, right? It's only in that free speech culture that you get excellent science.
Absolutely. No, I couldn't agree with you more. And it's very interesting to think about. Yeah, I mean, culture at universities right now, and how it's shifting, or maybe not shifting, but certainly President Trump's done a lot to change some of that
Well,
focus.
one of his very first executive orders was to reestablish free speech in this country. I was part of a lawsuit against the Biden administration, because the Biden administration, they had a systematic policy, John, to suppress free speech, right? They would go to social media companies, order them essentially to take down vast pages of even true scientific ideas. Like, if you're vaccine injured, they went to Facebook and told Facebook to take down private pages where vaccine injured people would just talk to each other.
Right.
They ordered Twitter, this lawsuit, this Missouri versus Biden lawsuit, uncovered vast evidence of a all of government approach to suppress speech contrary on scientific matters, contrary to what the Biden administration thought was good or true or just. And they were often wrong. They pressured social media companies to suppress speech. I was actually blacklisted at Twitter the day I joined in 2021.
Wow.
And the Supreme Court ultimately ruled that I and my colleagues didn't have standing to sue, because we didn't have an email that said from Biden's folks to the Facebook or something that said censor Jay. But we did have his emails that said censor the kinds of ideas that I was espousing. Right, that masking toddlers was a bad idea, that opening schools is a good idea, that vaccine mandates made no sense given that the vaccine didn't stop the spread of COVID. They suppressed ideas at scale, and the Supreme Court said that's fine. The government can do that as long as they don't name a single individual.
Yeah.
Right now, the main thing protecting free speech in this country is President Trump's executive order saying that the government's not going to do that. Now, I've been watching like this brouhaha over some late night comedian, what's his name?
Jimmy Kimmel.
Jimmy Kimmel, right?
Over Charlie Kirk.
Yeah, and what you had there is like, you can see it. Like the guy was like, he was gone for 3 or 4 days because he essentially made, you're right, he made some basically a false statement about what Charlie Kirk actually believes in the wake of his death, and a lot of people got upset, and they were like writing to their local TV station saying, why are you having this guy lying about Charlie Kirk, the guy who's like, who's just been assassinated for his political beliefs and free speech beliefs. And he's pulled off the air for like 4 days by ABC. And somehow that's a free speech issue. It's not the government telling ABC to pull him off the air that did that. It was the individual people writing their local TV stations. You can see this because after he was restored, dozens and dozens of the local channels are not going to show him again. Right? That's consistent with free speech. Like that's speech based on like what people are interested to hear. Like I don't have a right when I put a tweet up on Twitter to have millions of people look at it. But I do have a right to put whatever I want up on Twitter. You shouldn't have the government essentially tell people. And if you think about the difference between Jimmy Kimmel and what happened during the pandemic in the Biden administration, let's say the worst case. Let's say you believe, and you're listening to this, you say, "Oh, well, look, the government did say to ABC, take Kimmel off." Well, didn't, but like, let's say you believe that. At least there, ABC can say, "Well, Kimmel, you're being taken off. The government's telling you to take us off." What the government did during the Biden administration was say, take all these ideas off, and I wouldn't even know. They could do it anonymously.
Mm-hmm.
It's vast power to suppress speech is what the Biden administration did, and got away with it, frankly. And as a result, millions of people are worse off. Their kids didn't get years of schooling that they should have had. They lost their jobs over vaccine mandates. They couldn't visit their loved ones in hospital as they were dying. All this because the honest scientific debate that should have happened during the pandemic did not happen, thanks to these speech restrictions. We can't have that for lots of reasons, but certainly we can't have scientific progress unless we establish an environment where speech is absolutely free in the sense that I've been talking about it.
Absolutely. I have one last question for you, Jay, and it's about animal testing. So animal testing, my understanding, has actually lessened, or I know, there's this terrible instances of animal testing on beagles that was going on, I think, under the NIH purview. Some of this has stopped, and my sense is that you have a position that we should avoid animal testing whenever wherever possible, unless there's no alternative sort of viable model. I mean, tell us a little bit about that in terms of what's going on. I think there's some people out there that will be very interested and excited to hear that animal testing's been reduced under your tenure.
Yeah, I mean, it's actually interesting. Like PETA, the people for the ethical treatment of animals had sent me flowers when I put the policy I'm about to tell you in place. Although there's some groups that still don't like me because they want zero animal use. So first, let me just set the stage. So animal use in research has been a mainstay for biomedical research for many, for essentially centuries. And you can understand why. Like, imagine you're trying a new drug out for the very first time. You can't give it to humans to start. You just cannot, because if you do, you don't know the dose. You don't know what if it's lethal. You need to have some sense of is it it does what the safety is before you give it to first human. You have to know a lot about the new drug or molecule before you give it to a human, right? And then there's like animal systems that indicate something about the human physiology, right? So like the first knowledge of how our circulatory system came from animals, and analysis of animals. William Harvey, and so like you can understand why animal use is part of biomedical research. At the same time, there's a lot of animal use. The animal models are just thoughtlessly in a very, very simple sense, single sense, meaning the question is just people are used to using some animal model, and they don't ask whether the thing you learn from the animal model can be translated over to something that's useful for humans. Mm-hmm. And in fact, occasionally you'll have animal models that mislead you, right? So like, you have a rat model or mouse model of Alzheimer's disease. You can cure the Alzheimer's disease in the mouse, but that treatment that works in the mouse does not translate over to humans. Well, then why are you even working with that model if the knowledge you gain from that mouse model doesn't translate over to humans? Mm-hmm. So that's the new policy I put in place. Thanks to there's a woman who's been working at this in the NIH for more than a decade, named Nicole Kleinstroyer, who taught me about this. There are now huge advances in alternatives to animal models. In many cases, you can use these things called organoids, which are like essentially tissue cells on a chip. You can have these sort of in silico, meaning like AI methods, a whole host of other methods that sometimes replace the animal models that people traditionally use and do better at predicting what will happen in humans when you give a new drug to it or something, right? So that's the new policy. The new policy, first, you can't have unethical treatment of animals. You can't have beagles that are tortured. That's just a given. That's never going to happen. And if it does happen, we're going to put the hammer down on you. But if you do use animals for research, you have to justify it by showing that the research that you're doing, the knowledge you're gaining, can translate over to human activities, human applications, and also that there aren't other alternative methods that could do it better than the animal model itself. It's the goal is the mission, which is advance human health through research, advance longevity through research. That's the goal of that. And the happy byproduct of that is that we're not doing research on using animal models that aren't necessary for advancing human health.
Well, that's fantastic. I'm sure there's many beagles, animals, and people who thank you for it. Jay, I really want to thank you for coming on. This has been an amazing conversation. Really enjoyed it, and it's so great to see you and hear how you're doing at NIH and to hear about your new vision for it. So it's a real honor to have you on.
Thank you, John. I'm looking forward to coming back and visiting Stanford someday when I finally get out of here.
We'll look forward to having you.
All right.
This is the Capitalism and Freedom, the 21st Century Podcast, an official podcast of the Hoover Institution Economic Policy Working Group, where we talk about economics, markets, and public policy. I'm Jon Hartley, your host. Thanks so much for joining us.